Okay, hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Limitless Podcast. My name is Thaon Simms, your host, and joining us as always is your co-host, Dr. Matthew Preston. Hail up the people in Matthew.
Hey guys, what's good?
And today we have a very special guest. Want him to introduce himself, but his name is Mr. Rohan Smith. Welcome, Rohan. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. Yes, as I said, my name is Rohan Smith. I'm a software engineer. I'm into technology. I'm into Bitcoin, of course.
You can tell by the shirt.
Yes. This is one of many Bitcoin shirts that I own.
Wow. Okay.
So it's an interest of mine. And I guess I'd like to talk about it, like to share with people about what Bitcoin is and technology in general. I'm a general early adopter to technology. So I like to be on the cutting edge of technology, and I guess whenever I have the opportunity to share, I do.
Okay, nice.
Awesome.
What's your day-to-day job within within technology?
So I'm a software developer. So I'm actually currently I'm originally from Kingston, Portland, Spanish Town, Jamaica.
Yeah.
I'm currently living in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly Tobago. There's a small 50,000 population.
I love Tobago. Love that island.
Yeah, it's great here.
Yeah.
But in Tobago, because the population is so small, there isn't a lot of technology or opportunities for work in that area. So since I've been here since 2013, I've been working remotely in the US as a software developer. And I also have my own software development agency, so to speak, where I do projects for companies locally, internationally as well. So that's pretty much my day-to-day. I build my own apps as well. So I'm an online entrepreneur. So I build apps online. I do some blogging, some YouTube, I'm multifaceted in that sense. I just like doing tech-related stuff. So,
is there anything you can share publicly that you've done? Any type of app?
Or any things that any companies maybe you worked with that our viewers might know?
Okay, so in terms of companies I've worked with a couple of notable ones. TripAdvisor, a bunch of colleges like Stanford, UCLA, Duke. Because I do mostly work with web development, so I've worked with a couple of those companies. I've worked with local universities, UWI. Do a lot of work for them too.
Okay.
For my own personal projects, I do YouTube. I like to research niches and things that are interesting. So, for example, one of my most successful YouTube channels was on balloon decoration. I've never done balloon decoration before that, but I saw, based on my research, it was trending. Did a video, got over 1 million views.
Wow.
So it's just I like to experiment with technology and software and social media, anything tech related. That's pretty much me. I'm a multifaceted kind of
jack of all trades.
Yeah, pretty much.
Jack of all trades. Well, I think we can get into it. The reason that we really wanted to come back or wanted you to come on this podcast, you can tell by the shirt, it's to talk about cryptocurrency, but with a focus more on Bitcoin. I remember seeing you on Twitter and stuff like that. You were talking about Bitcoin and you were trying to I know you had set up like a Discord at one point you're trying to give more information into how you can buy cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, because it's, it still is pretty hard, I'd say, in the Caribbean. And I guess in other countries, but specifically in the Caribbean, it's pretty hard to get into cryptocurrency. There's less information out there. It's harder, like some banks, they don't want you to deal with it and things like that. So, just for someone who doesn't really know what Bitcoin is, how would you explain simply what Bitcoin is to a layman?
I like to start off with the explanation of what money is, right? Because it gives you a bit of context. Because if I just say digital money, people might think, okay, but why not just use my card, right? My debit card is digital money. So what's the big deal with Bitcoin? Right. If you think about the money in the essence of what money is, money is really a method for exchanging, well, for storing energy, right? Because the way people pass value is through an exchange of energy. If I were to buy a loaf of bread, that loaf of bread, that farmer went out and he dug the holes and planted the seeds and did the work, and he got his wheat, and then he sent it to the mill, and the whole process of production is a lot of energy, right? Not only physical energy but mental energy as well, right? And after it's finished, he has a bread. Now, not everybody doesn't need a bread, right? However, for those who need it, they want to be able to trade something the farmer would want as well. Now, I might sell apples. I might grow apples. The farmer might only need 1 or 2 apples, right? So there needs to be a standard means of exchanging energy between myself as an apple farmer and the farmer. Now, throughout history, there have been many forms of money. We spoke about like trading. That was like the initial way, but it didn't work. For if I have everything I needed from you, I didn't need more of what you had to offer. So people tried to trade using things like shells, like seashells. I think was one of the earlier forms of money. One of the reasons is because it was unique. You couldn't find it everywhere. There are specific types of shells. Sometimes they had some specific types of stones, like really interesting looking ones, and then you had precious metals, because these things were scarce and hard to find. People want them as a means of exchange, and as technology became more and more prevalent, things like seashells were easier to mine. You can now go to a different island that has a lot more seashells and bring them over into wherever doesn't have it, and you have inflation. Right? There are stories like that where there were economies that were based around certain types of monetary exchanges. And then, say, for example, Europeans would come into that economy and realize that, hey, these people have put a lot of value on these things that we can find in mass somewhere else. Bring it in, and inflation and the whole economy breaks down. So the point is that money is essential as a means of exchange, right? And for years, the main top tier type of money has been gold, right? And we've seen in different empires through the past millennia how gold was important for economy, and it has been that way for a long time. Just a few hundred years ago is when we had what we call money, in the sense that we now know it. But first, money started out as gold coins, right? So small denominations of gold. But then, I think like the emperors in Rome, started to chip off the gold and said, okay, that's too much gold for the coin. So they chip off the gold and give you not the same amount of weight for gold, and that is a form of inflation. And then you switch over to silver coins, and then it came down into the 20th century when banks started to come around, where a bank said, instead of walking around with this whole bunch of gold to do transactions, we'll keep the gold, leave a piece of paper as a receipt to say, we have this amount of gold for you, right? And that was kind of the initiation of paper money, where it said, I have a receipt from the bank, say, the bank has X amount of gold for me, so I can give you that receipt, and that gold belongs to you, right? And then money became tied to how much gold you had in the bank, right? But then over time, and I'm running through history right now quickly, governments wanted to spend more than the gold that they had in the treasury, right? And there's a whole story with the US and the US deciding to hold the gold for most of the major countries in the world at the time. When France came back and said, hey, we want back our gold, the US said, they sailed into New York with a warship and said, give us our gold. And I remember the president at the time, he said, well, we're no longer on the gold standard. US dollar is not equivalent to the amount of gold, we'll give you US dollars. And that kind of broke the whole gold standard for the US dollar. And since then, it has been what we call fiat. Fiat money is where the government says this is $100 and it's worth $100. And you have to believe that. Right? And then you take whatever the government says and you work for your $100. When the government wants to print more money, they print more money. And your $100 is now worth $90. And then when they print more money, that $90 is worth, and the process goes on where your money is being devalued because the government says it's devalued. Right? Fiat just means calling it into existence. They call more money into existence because they can. And that has been damaging economically for a lot of countries. We see countries like Zimbabwe, Venezuela, where billions of dollars is in the streets because the government just printed more money. Right? And that money now it no longer represented energy because there's no real work. There's nothing backing that money anymore. Right? There's no energy behind the money, so the money has no value. So if there's no energy behind the money, then you have to print more of nothing to get more nothing, right? So, and essentially your economy will fail, as we've seen happen with hyperinflation in many other countries. So, enter Bitcoin. In 2008, I believe, 8 or 9, I might have my dates wrong. Well, it has been brewing for a while. A lot of people have been saying, there needs to be a way to separate money from state. Because in the gold standard, where gold was the primary means of transaction, money and state are separated, right? The state didn't own the gold, right? However, once we went to the fiat standard, the state now owned money. And this is, a lot of us think that this is how it has always been, but that's just a few hundred years old, right? The concept of a state-owned money is a recent phenomenon. And so now we have everything, all the money, most of the money in the world is owned by the state, right? So we wanted to figure out how can we get back to a separation of state and money. So a lot of people have been thinking about it over the years. But in 2008 or 2009, a gentleman or person or group of people called Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a paper called the Bitcoin White Paper, outlining what they believe would be an idea for a decentralized form of money. And this is what technologically became Bitcoin. And Bitcoin itself is a means of transaction and storage of energy where you're able to put energy into mining Bitcoin as you would put energy into mining gold. And then that energy is now stored in a digital format in a wallet that exists in the digital space, right? And the cool thing about Bitcoin is that it's decentralized, meaning there's no authority. There's no single authority. There is no single person who has control over what Bitcoin looks like. There's no single state, which at this point that can come and overthrow Bitcoin because it doesn't exist in a single place. In fact, we run what we call a Bitcoin node. I just use a small Raspberry Pi computer. So I'm supporting the Bitcoin network. So if right now North America was to be hit by a nuclear bomb and Europe and Africa, I'd be still supporting Bitcoin through my node because I exist as a part of a web of Bitcoin nodes supporting the network. Right. So it is very what we call resistant to being blocked. In fact, China has blocked Bitcoin or banned Bitcoin probably tens of times, right? But it still exists because it's there's no central place or central location where you can stop it, right? Now, it comes with a lot of advantages. One, it has programmed scarcity. So, for example, our governments, whenever they feel like, they decided we're going to increase the inflation rate. Bitcoin inflation decreases every 4 years, right? So there's only 21 million Bitcoins that will ever be distributed. Most of it has already been distributed. But every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin that's get distributed every day reduce it until it will be zero in 100 years. And this is after information I'm passing. I'm just trying to see if I can compress this. But basically, Bitcoin has program scarcity. So there will never be inflation in Bitcoin. It's a deflating currency. It will always be more and more expensive to get more Bitcoin, because we have the people who create the Bitcoin every day are called miners. Right? And the miners are basically a big set of computers playing the lottery, right? So I like to do it in this way, where we're saying every couple of minutes, a lottery number is picked on the Bitcoin network. And there are computers that need to calculate different numbers. So if I can calculate 100 numbers within that period of time, then I have 100 tickets. But if I have very fast computers that can calculate 1,000,000 numbers, I have 1,000,000 tickets, right? So the more processing power you have is the greater chance that you have to win the Bitcoin for that block. So we call it blocks. So it's a block that gets generated every couple of minutes, and the block has a specific address, and you have to kind of try to figure out what the address is. Right? So you have to put computing power, a lot of computing power. I think they say currently it's about the amount of energy Argentina uses to do Bitcoin mining. So it's a lot of energy to generate this, and it also works as a means of security, because it prevents negative or bad actors from trying to take over the network. Because to take over the network, you have to produce more energy than what's trying to mine Bitcoin to overtake the network, right? So it's a very complex system, but the beauty of it is that it's censorship resistant, it's decentralized, and it's a deflationary currency, and it's accessible to anyone across the world with just a computer or a smartphone. I think I've talked a lot. I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I mean, you said I think you explained it pretty well.
Yeah, the origins all the way to what it is today.
Especially, and I do see, like, for example, I think recently, the Russia-Ukraine war that started was at 2022. What I know happened was that Russia had a lot of assets in other countries like the US, and then essentially the US doesn't agree with what Russia is doing, so they seized a lot of those assets. And so, for example, things like that can happen when you have a centralized currency or a currency that's controlled by a government. So I do see that is, I guess, an advantage for Bitcoin, that you can, have it, like, you can bring the money with you. Like, it's a code. It can be a code in your head. You can bring it anywhere.
Right, because you're talking about states there, but the typical person has access to the same ability to be able to move your money. Say, for example, there are states that fail. Like every couple of years, a state fails, right? And what a lot of those states do is that the money that you have in your bank account becomes property of the state. Right? How do you now be able to leave a failing state if you can't withdraw all of your money, right? Or get the cash to move, or do a swift transaction to a different country, right? What a lot of people do is that they have peer-to-peer Bitcoin exchanges, where basically I go to a man on the street and I say, hey, do you want some Bitcoin? Or do you want some money for your Bitcoin? Right? And then I can do transactions locally without the needing for a bank. And when you can do transactions like that, for example, here in Trinidad and Tobago, there's a lot of issues with getting foreign currency, because the government has put in a lot of restrictions on foreign currency. There is a huge black market in cryptocurrency here, right? I'm in some WhatsApp groups, and in a single day in the public transactions, you can see $50,000-$60,000 being transacted between people, buyers and sellers, and that's just in the public. We're not talking about people who have, long-going relationships with people in private. So there are probably hundreds of thousands of US dollars that gets transacted just here in Trinidad and Tobago on the black market. So in larger countries, it's probably millions that gets transacted in cryptocurrency every day, right? So there's regimes and countries that need Bitcoin, There's some that, I mean, for example, Jamaica, it's a bit, the economic situation there is a bit freer, where a lot of people don't find the need for it. But there are countries that they can't exist without it. Something like Argentina, Nigeria, you know, a lot of these countries have economic situations that Bitcoin is a savior for many of them.
I know El Salvador moved it to their...
Yeah. Well, that's where
that's what you're gonna say. Oh,
yeah.
Have you been
I was
there?
actually there. I went to El Salvador a couple of years ago. I just wanted to experience what it felt like to walk into McDonald's. Which store? Like, I think I went to Pizza Hut, one of those chain stores, and took up my phone and paid for something over the counter. It was like the amazing experience of being able to pay for Bitcoin, because they have it as a standard currency in El Salvador. Yeah, so they support it. So I
had a question. You said it in Bitcoin mining, right? It takes a lot of computational power, like a lot of computing power, to generate I don't know, I guess 1 Bitcoin, but it would probably be even. My question is, with all that energy that you use, isn't it... I'm trying to form the question, but wouldn't it be seen as something negative that you have to use this much energy just to generate Bitcoin?
No, I love that this question has come at this time, because people only complain about the use of energy when it's doing something they're not interested in. There has never been a technological advancement that didn't require orders of magnitude more of energy, right? What has been done is the means of generating that energy has improved over time. Now imagine if we had to run our current vehicular system on coal. It just wouldn't make any sense. So over time, coal was the initial form of energy for steam engines and so on. But as technology improved, we figured out how to make petroleum, right, and even use nuclear in some of our vehicles, right? So as time goes on, the means and source of energy improve, right? But the amount of energy that's required by newer technology will always increase by orders of magnitude, right? Now, 2 years ago, everyone was arguing, why is Bitcoin using so much energy? You know, the whole cryptocurrency thing is a scam. You shouldn't be using so much energy to do all of this. And a year later, most of the processing that was being done with graphics cards, NVIDIA and all those, have now switched over to artificial intelligence. I've heard nobody complain about AI and energy. AI uses just as much, maybe even more energy than the cryptocurrency industry. So that ChatGPT that we were so happy to use uses phenomenally huge amounts of energy, right? And they're thinking that they need to improve energy use consumption and energy sources and find better sources of energy, because the AI industry is like expanding dramatically. So it's just going to use more and more and more energy, because there has been no technological advancement that doesn't use orders of magnitude of energy. It's just how technology works, right? And it's okay when you see personally how it's benefiting you. But if it doesn't benefit you, then a lot of people start to complain. What we should work on is how we can sustainably get clean energy, right? And with Bitcoin, the concept is that the cheaper your energy is the more money you get to keep in your pocket, right? So as a miner, I want to go to the cheapest form of energy. And the cheapest form of energy tends to be some form of renewable energy. In fact, there are Bitcoin miners who use what we call stranded energy, right? So for example, there are gas, what we call them, gas mines, or like natural gas mines that are hundreds of miles in nowhere. And to pipe that gas to any major city, or to run electrical cables to that gas to generation, would make no sense because the loss is over a distance. But a Bitcoin miner can go to the source of the energy, right? Turn that natural gas into energy on spot, mine Bitcoin, and that gas is usually flared. So they'll take that gas and burn it out in the sky because there's no way they can use that energy. But there are Bitcoin miners who go to these gas mines and they set up shop basically over these energy where you'd normally flare the gas. And they generate the energy from there and mine Bitcoin. Use the internet through Starlink or something and send back the information, the Bitcoin, back to civilization. There's no other technology in the world that can convert energy to value better than that. Because electricity would lose based on transmission distance. Or if you're trying to do pipes, that's millions of dollars worth of piping just to get to a small gas. I don't know the proper name for it, but just to get to a small thing of gas, it would make any sense to get millions of dollars of pipeline to locations like that. And that's just one form. Because we're talking about setting up hydro plants on waterfalls in the middle of nowhere. We're talking about going to volcanoes and using the names of things, basically using the heat from the volcanoes to heat up water to spin turbines. I don't remember the name of that generation. But there are many places where Bitcoin can use clean energy for almost free, right? And when miners go to these places, they earn more money because they need to spend less money to generate electricity, right? So Bitcoin doesn't have an energy problem. It is tending to cleaner and cheaper energy.
Okay. Fair. So for our podcast, right, we like to talk about finance, specifically investments, right?
Beautiful.
So I kind of want to talk about,
Yes.
maybe some of the economic implications or just even Bitcoin as an investment. So I know you spoke about, gold, how gold was the standard. I know now the Bitcoin has been referred to as like, digital gold. And you explained that there are only, you said, was it 21
million.
million, sorry, 21 million Bitcoin. That's just the cap in terms of supply. So supply is capped, it's limited. So of course that has the potential to store value.
Correct.
But in terms of when you compare it to something like stocks, Bitcoin, you're not investing in a company, right? So you're not gonna get like dividend. The company that you're not seeing cash flow in terms of company and so on. So the value of Bitcoin by a lot of people has actually been touted as being driven largely by speculation, right? And of course, it is also. This is what I hear from my friends who
I heard it all.
So,
Go ahead.
yeah. So I'm trying to see, why is it, do you think, that a lot of people are gravitating towards investing in Bitcoin over something like, stocks and so on, traditional investments?
There are a number of reasons. Just the one that you mentioned is the counterparty risk. There's no specific, there's no individual, there's no one person or company that can mess up Bitcoin. Like there's no third party that you have to watch to see, did this person cheat on his wife? And is him cheating on his wife going to cause my price to go down and never go back up?
Okay.
Right? If this person runs the company incorrectly and starts taking drugs, if Elon Musk says something about some sensitive thing, there is no risk on a specific individual or group, right?
Okay.
That's counterparty risk. We don't have that. It's people speak about speculation. Everything has speculation.
Agreed.
If you're honest about it, every single thing is speculative. No matter how much real value you think something provides, we're still speculating. and that's something other people are not really honest about, is that value is placed in something because everybody else thinks there's value in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, if I'm sure there have been really good companies that provide like a real product that has been really effective, but just the market just didn't catch on to them and they failed. So it's not the value of what the company offers. Other things like timing, there's other things just that income speculation, right? The thing I like about Bitcoin the most is I remember as a young person when I heard about stocks the first time. Fortunately, it wasn't Jamaica stock at the You hear about stocks, you're thinking about investing in Microsoft and investing in Apple. So I learned about stocks. And I'm like, how can I invest in Apple? How can I invest in Microsoft? You go and start to Google, and when you're checking, okay, you need to have a green card, you need to have a social security number, you need to, like, I can't do that. Then okay, there are probably ways around it, but you need to have a certain amount of money to go through a specific type of investment. Me with my $100 just would not be able to invest in Apple stock. And if I do, the cut that some middleman would take out of it would be huge, right? However,
I feel like the same could be said about Bitcoin though.
When Elon Musk took I think something $1 million from Tesla to invest in Bitcoin, and he saw, say, 10% increase, right? A man sitting on the corner of the street could have bought Bitcoin at the same price that Elon Musk did and saw the same amount of increase. He didn't have to have access to any specific advisor. He didn't have to have access to anyone. And he could have gotten Bitcoin from another guy sitting beside him on the street. Right? He didn't have to go through any type of verification. He didn't have to have a social security number. He didn't have to pay to open an investment account. He didn't have to have 2 passport pictures and a proof of address. All he needed to do was to find someone who had Bitcoin and was willing to sell. And for me, that access to investment is unprecedented. There is no other form of investment, even locally in your own country, that the man on the street has access to. And all he has to do is find someone who's willing to sell Bitcoin. And we might see it as, that's nothing. But now, your grandmother, assuming your grandmother doesn't have a degree in economics, can have access to one of the best the best performing asset of this century, right? It's a phenomenal thing that we don't even understand the extent of it, right? And your grandmother could have seen whatever growth Bitcoin has had over the past decade, right? By just knowing someone who had Bitcoin and was willing to sell. No, if that isn't access for the man, the people, and that isn't like opening up finance to the world, then I don't know what else is. And just that as a basic concept makes me bullish on Bitcoin. Just for the access. And I see where governments and institutions are trying to prevent that from happening, but it's inevitable.
Okay, fair. I will say, however, stocks has become more accessible. You are right, though, in terms of not necessarily everyone can have access to it, social security number and so on. We don't really have that in Jamaica.
Right.
We do still have hoops that we need to, go through. But it is getting better. I don't think it will ever get to the levels that, Bitcoin has, where you just, you have a wallet. I don't think it can ever, but it is a bit more accessible now.
Yeah, but think about it. I don't know the statistics, but there's a huge percentage of unbanked in the world, even in the context of
and Jamaica has a much higher rate than most. Yeah.
No. So that is savings/checkings account. Now, what percentage of those people's savings checkings account have investment accounts?
Yeah, right? It's tiny.
Like but the good thing about Bitcoin is that it doesn't care about what type of account you have.
Yeah.
You have a mobile phone. You probably don't even need a mobile phone, right? In fact, Bitcoin is so amazing that all I need is a piece of paper to write down my address, write down my key, my key for to access my Bitcoin, and I give people my address on a piece of paper, and I have an account. I just need two pieces of paper, a secret and a public, right? So the secret key is so I can access my Bitcoin, and the public key so you can give me a Bitcoin. Two pieces of paper. It gives you access to one of the most powerful financial tools in the world, right? And that just cannot be replicated in anything else. And the world has not yet come to the realization of the power of this. And I mean, I think it takes time, but when they do, it's going to be huge.
But one of the things, I get that, so there's the pro side that, without know your customer or KYC requirements, anybody can, create an account and send money. But then there's the con side that essentially people that, aren't very good, they could be black market dealing with illegal activities, they are able to send the money, and you can't really, it's very hard to track. And so there's that other side of it. So even though the KYC does come with some cons, there is the benefit that having KYC and those things, having to give your information, it can also, prevent certain bad people from dealing with Bitcoin. So I think that gives Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies a bad rep, because people are saying that, hey, there's people that, and it has been proven that there are people that are, sending money, doing bad things. So I don't know, what would you say is, I guess, the argument against that? Like, is there a way is that just something we have to accept to the Bitcoin network? Because then, I don't know.
If you were to make an estimate, let's make up some numbers for argument's sake. All of the scams and thefts and so on in the world that happened in the past 24 hours was $100 million. What percentage of that do you think came through Bitcoin?
Let's say 30%.
Well, one, that is an extreme exaggeration, because one, the majority of people still don't even understand how to use Bitcoin, right? And two, the majority of theft and crime happens through the fiat system, right? It is something that exists. It's just that when institutions see something they can't control, then it becomes a blame game that is going to be used for XYZ. A lot of people don't realize how traceable a Bitcoin transaction is, right? If I send you Bitcoin, I can watch that Bitcoin I sent you for the next 100 years to see what wallets it goes through. And in order to convert your money, and it's like a significant amount of money, Bitcoin to fiat, most people have to go through exchanges because of liquidity, right? And once you're going to an exchange has to list all its wallets to the government, right? So for example, you use Coinbase. So if I open a Coinbase account, I have a wallet in Coinbase, and I'm converting my Bitcoin to fiat through Coinbase. Coinbase has a list of all their wallets, and they have the list of names attached to each wallet. Now, the government, especially the US government, they are big on tracing Bitcoin. Once there's a crime done with Bitcoin, they keep an eye on where it goes. And once that touches to Coinbase, they contact Coinbase and say, who's that? And it's very difficult for criminals to turn their Bitcoin into fiat. So it's not very encouraging for the typical criminal to use Bitcoin. But a lot of people don't explain that, right? Because it's the scapegoat, and because we have no control over it, we want to say it's the worst thing ever, right? So I'm not going to lie and say it can't be used. I mean, a lot of crime is used, a lot of criminals use Bitcoin. In fact, there's a saying that technology isn't innovative enough if it's not being used for crime. Right? Think about phone,
AI,
internet, AI. If it's innovative enough, it's going to be used for crime. It's just a part of the process of technology innovation, right? But saying it is the source of all crime is That doesn't make any sense, right? So there have to be what do you call it, ways to mitigate criminal activity with Bitcoin, and people have been doing it. I said you can do a lot of tracing of Bitcoin. There are actually firms set up to trace Bitcoin, and that's their job. So it's not that it doesn't exist, and that crime doesn't exist on the Bitcoin network. It does, but it's over exaggerated in terms of what criminals do with Bitcoin because it's just so traceable.
Okay.
So it's
fair.
Uh,
How one of the things I'd say, like, we're one of the main reasons we're doing this episode, we want, people are seeing the price of Bitcoin rise. I think Bitcoin is like 69,000 US.
Yeah.
One Bitcoin is 69,000 US, and that's close to all-time high, right? And people are probably saying, hey, I'm seeing it rise. Could it go higher? I'm seeing it come from 20,000, 30,000 within a year or two. Maybe I should put my money in this, right? But, would you recommend any strategies? This, once again, this is not financial advice, but how, for example, do you invest in Bitcoin? Do you dollar cost average it? Did you put a significant portion 10 years ago and you're just holding? And what would you recommend to, for example, someone just starting or just wanting to get into Bitcoin?
So first, my advice on that is always, if you're investing in Bitcoin, you have to have a long-term mindset. And long-term in Bitcoin is 4 more years, right? So if you're not investing for 4 more years, you're going to be on this and a bit on the edge of your seat because the volatility is not like stocks and bonds. They're 2 different types of entities. They should not be compared, right? A lot of people compare stocks with Bitcoin. You cannot compare stocks with Bitcoin. They are 2 different things, right? Because they just operate on a whole lot of different principles. So if you're thinking of investing in Bitcoin because you want short-term returns, I would advise against it. I said short-term is less than 4 years. Thing is, you might come in at the right time. If you came in 12 months ago, you have hit the jackpot, right? However, my recommendation is always have a minimum of 4 years. My minimum is about 30 because I'm investing for my children, right? I think of Bitcoin as there's a guy who's a Bitcoin influencer. His name is Michael Saylor.
MicroStrategy.
Yeah, from MicroStrategy, the CEO of MicroStrategy. His thesis on investing in Bitcoin is thinking of it as real estate, right? If you go, the people who went and bought land in one of the most expensive real estates in the world, which is Manhattan, when they bought it, they're not thinking, okay, I'm buying this in 1907, so by 1915 I'm going to sell this because I've made 200 or 300% increase on. No, they don't think of selling property in New York because it's property in New York City. Right? You don't sell property in New York City. That is where your money goes to die, right? You go and you put your investment in it, and because it's a property that will just continually increase over time. The rate might differ in certain types of economic situations, but that in 10, 20 years, the money you put in is going to be significantly low. Well, the value of the money in 10, 20 years will be significantly high than it is today. And whatever ups and downs the market might see, because it is the most valuable real estate in the world. And that is what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is the most valuable real estate in the world, right? If the US government, if there's World War III, you cannot move your property from Manhattan into Switzerland because they're neutral. You have to endure whatever goes in New York. If there's a flood and Manhattan gets sunk under the water, you cannot move your real estate. Bitcoin can be moved from one place to another. It's digital gold, right? And I said a lot of people have not understood what all this means. Let me say this will take probably decades for the real meaning of this Bitcoin to come to fruition, right? So it's something that for those who understand, you capitalize early, and you think minimum 4 years. I mean, for me, my personal Bitcoin story, Bitcoin taught me about investment because I got into Bitcoin decently early. I learned about Bitcoin, say 2013, 2014, but my investment ability was zero. Like, what I knew about investment is you go in, you make a profit, and you come out. I bought $6 worth of Bitcoin in 2014, 15, and that was 0.5 Bitcoin at a time. And Bitcoin went up to doubled it, and I like, what? Hello, one time.
Wow.
Wow.
And I like
Half a Bitcoin.
and the price went back down. I was like, phew, it's a good thing I sold. And then I was out of the market and I saw the price 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, went up to 19,000. And I was like, what did I do?
Yeah.
Because of my understanding of what investment was, right? Because I thought it was just go in, come out, make a money, you leave, right? But no, as I've learned over time, you realize that investment, well, I mean, it's not about trying to make the profit and leave. Of course, you can spend, if there are things that you like and you want to spend on, I mean, it doesn't mean you're going to keep your money in something and never spend your money. You take a cut, you take take profit, take a small piece and you go on a vacation. You know, you go out with your wife or your girlfriend and you do the things that make life worth living, right? But you have to always take in consideration that this is a long-term thing. If you're really thinking about building wealth, you can't think about this 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. So you have to think long-term, like decades, right? And once you can think in decades, then Bitcoin is the perfect asset for you. But many people are not there. I wasn't there at that point. And so my advice is that if you're not thinking 4 years or less, don't go into Bitcoin. If you're looking to build long-term assets and something you can give to your children or grandchildren, then that's where you put your money for Bitcoin. And you won't even worry about when the price falls. If the price goes up to 3,000 right now, my plan is to buy more Bitcoin. So for me, essentially, I'm a proponent of dollar cost averaging, but it's not something I necessarily practice all the time. One, because of just sometimes how funds come. But I buy pretty much as often as I can. As often as I have cash to buy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Honest.
Yeah.
Honest. Yeah. Because I mean, one of the things though is that, I mean, with Bitcoin, it's very volatile. You know, let's actually probably should share my screen to maybe show the price chart for people that don't know. One sec. So, you guys seeing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said some interesting dates. So you said, for example, about 2014. If you see in here, 2014, 2015. So back then it was in the 200s or so.
Yeah, I think I was like 300. Yeah, I think about half.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember exactly, but I remember going 0.5 in somewhere 2015 there about.
Mm-hmm. And you can just see like how much like in 2017 it went up
19
to like 13,000 and then comes back down.
It went up to 19. 19 was the all-time high in 2017.
Yeah, some differently. But I guess one of the things that makes it hard, because I guess you're trying to say that at some point you think that Bitcoin could essentially replace fiat currency, or do you think that there'll be some sort of balance where people will see Bitcoin as a more investable asset and you'll use Bitcoin and fiat?
To be honest, I because of just how we are as a society and how Bitcoin is, I don't think a lot of people believe that there'll be a quote unquote Bitcoin standard, right? Where all money will be tied to Bitcoin. But I still think there might be some form of fiat. But what ends up happening is that perhaps there'll only be like 3 fiat currencies remaining. It might be like US, Chinese yen, and Russian. So I don't know. So it's just there might be a split because the current financial system is just going to be it's failing. It's a failing system that in a few decades, I believe, it just would not be able to sustain itself. Right. However, what I do see is that governments should start to transition to realize that, hey, let's base our economy around Bitcoin. Let's still issue fiat, but our economy will still be supported by the value of Bitcoin. So this will be the government investment, because the government will have the fiat to buy the Bitcoin initially, and they'll be able to print trillions of dollars to buy Bitcoin. And that has given them the ability to kind of pull a large amount of Bitcoin in their custody. And then so now when they're issuing fiat, they'll have stronger backing of their fiat currency, where failure of the fiat that they build on it wouldn't be as bad as it was before, where it was built on pretty much nothing. So I still think there will be fiat in the future, and just because of how we work and people still want the inflation, because that's the government's. I think there's an economic theory behind it, where inflation is a good thing. So it's just
the Bank of Jamaica has inflation target. I think that's a 4 to 6%.
Right.
And other countries, for example, I think the US has a 2% inflation target. What they usually say is that some amount of inflation is good. You just want to control it. Because if you have deflation, generally the economies don't do well. If you have excessive inflation, the economies don't do well. So they just say, okay, let's have a target and let's just try to increase wages at a faster rate than inflation. So that's always, it's very sticky.
That argument is arguable because generally when you look deeper into those arguments about deflation causing economic downturn, there's usually corruption behind that. So it's not just deflation and so on. But anyway, that's for a different podcast.
Is it because Bitcoin is just generally de-inflation or deflate? Yeah.
yeah. But I mean,
No. As in, I'm not saying that in a facetious way, Preston. I see
No,
Preston laughing. That's why.
Actually, Bitcoin has there is a kind of inflation that happens in Bitcoin, because you can mine new Bitcoin every couple of minutes. New Bitcoin is mined, right? So
that gets less every time you mine Bitcoin.
So eventually, so every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin.
Let's talk about
it. Just happened recently. It happened just like a month ago or so.
A month ago, right. I keep forgetting the specific numbers, but say for example, when I mine Bitcoin, I'd have gotten, if I pick the right
this
number,
is you explaining halving now.
Right. So this is halving.
Okay, Bitcoin halving.
And this is how the deflationary part works, right? It's program scarcity, right? So whenever using the same lottery example before, if I choose the right lotto number and I win Bitcoin, there's a set amount of Bitcoin that's issued every couple of minutes, right? And when I get it, say for example, it's 30, right? I get 30 Bitcoin because I won that ticket. In the next 4 years, that splits to 15 Bitcoin, right? Now, hopefully, the fiat equivalent to pay my electricity bill would have gone up because Bitcoin, the inflation in the issuing of Bitcoin, the cost for each Bitcoin would have gone up.
Yes.
So it shouldn't have impacted my daily operations. But sometimes it does. But so when it does, the miners now have to increase the price that they sell their Bitcoin for to get back the amount of money they spend on energy to mine Bitcoin, right? So by them raising their prices, it impacts the price of the system overall, because all new Bitcoin has to come from somewhere, and the miners are the ones who kind of set the price, quote unquote, for Bitcoin. And by them setting the price, because their expenses have gone up, the cost per Bitcoin also goes up. So after each mining, you're expecting to see a higher price in Bitcoin over time. It's not necessarily instant, because the market just responds at a particular speed. And there are seasons. You have the bull market and bear market. So for example, in Bitcoin, traditionally, you want to, if you're investing, invest in October. we call it October in Bitcoin, because everything goes up from October.
Hold on,
so, so there's a season. I think it's the start of Q4 when money gets freed up in large institutional buyers, and they get to spend a lot more on Bitcoin. So there's just a lot of things that impact the price of Bitcoin. The longer you're in it, you know more about it.
Actually found out. So with the last Bitcoin halving was April 19th this year.
Yes.
And now you get 3.125 Bitcoin every block. And
Right.
it says the final halving is actually expected to occur in 2140.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
because I guess one of the tough parts in terms of like we spoke about the El Salvador example, right?
Mhm.
I don't remember exactly when El Salvador switched, but maybe it was like 2021, 2022, right?
Yeah, there were.
And then, Bitcoin, very volatile, as you mentioned. Like there was some significant drawdowns, like it dropped 50%, 40%. So it's tough because imagine I'm at the store, like I'm a store owner. I'm hearing about Bitcoin. I'm like, hey, a customer says they want to buy and they only have Bitcoin. So I'm like, okay, I'll sell you this. And then they sell me this. And then tomorrow, the FTLs, like there are things like, okay, as much as you mentioned before that Bitcoin is decentralized and it's not like, oh, this person, something about Elon Musk happens. What about like what happened with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried and a lot of those things? Even though they're not Bitcoin itself, it's almost like just seeing, okay, these are other cryptocurrencies or altcoins. And those can cause significant drawdown. So there still is. And then imagine you're the store owner, you sell the person, they give you the money. And then just because Sam Bankman-Fried or these other guys did these stuff, your money that you are going to use to pay for your sons, whatever, just drops 50%. And you're just like, wait, what?
All right. So there, I'm going to explain two things with Bitcoin there. So there's Bitcoin, the technology, and there's Bitcoin, the investment, right?
Okay.
So I gave it a thesis for the investment. 4 years minimum, right? So if you're a store owner who's willing to wait 4 years, then I would encourage you. In fact, that is how I got most of my Bitcoin. I started an online store selling VPNs. And VPN people don't like to give their identity. So they said they want to buy with Bitcoin. So I was like, hey, okay, put your Bitcoin here. Got a lot of my first Bitcoin that way. So the thing about it is that if you're willing to keep your Bitcoin, use you through your store, then I say accept it. Now, if you want to spend a Bitcoin for your expenses, then use the Bitcoin technology, right? Bitcoin technology offers you instant transactions, right? Allows you international transactions. It allows you with speed and your customer doesn't need to have a bank account. It just opens you up to the customer base, right? Overseas, etc. Now, Bitcoin itself can be stabilized, right? There are a number of ways to stabilize Bitcoin. One, you could sell it and buy a type of stable coin, which is out of Bitcoin network. But there are also Bitcoin stable coins, right? So there are ways to third-party companies that, for example, I have a friend here in Trinidad and Tobago who works for one. And how they stabilize Bitcoin is that when you deposit Bitcoin, you say, I want to keep this in stable sats, they call it. And what they do, they instantly open a short on your Bitcoin, right? So basically short Bitcoin, and if Bitcoin goes up, and the short, so it's basically balancing it both ways. So your Bitcoin remains at one value.
Okay.
Right?
So you hold the Bitcoin and you short it. So
right.
even if it goes up, you win. Well, I guess you win and you lose, but it cancels out.
It cancels out, right? So your Bitcoin remains stable. Right? So you don't have to worry about your Bitcoin. The amount of actual Bitcoin you have never changes because you earn if it goes down, right? And you earn if it goes up. Right? So it's So there are ways to use the technology to get the advancements of fast transactions. And I mean, I do e-commerce, and sometimes PayPal just confiscates your money. Stripe just confiscates your money because they suspect something. And that's crazy, right? With Bitcoin, nobody can confiscate your money, right? You have your money, you can take advantage of technology, and it gives you the ability to do instant transactions, right? Right now, if you go in Cash App, like my mom has Cash App. I want to send some money back to my mother from here in Trinidad and Tobago. Cash App doesn't support Trinidad and Tobago. I just went, I said, open the app, give me a Bitcoin address. I sent her some Bitcoin at Cash App. She converted to US dollars. Right? So it's in fact, the owner, CEO of what's his name, Jack Dorsey, he's huge on Bitcoin. Right? Of Cash App, the guy who owns Cash App, he's huge on Bitcoin. Right? Because he understands the technology behind Bitcoin. Right? And what it gives it access to, and how you can now have a world currency instead of being based on a specific country's fiat. And that technology is huge when it comes down to commerce. Like, for example, right now, if I do a wire transfer from between a bank here in Trinidad and Tobago to somewhere in Jamaica, it literally takes months for that money to reach. Literally months for the final transaction between the banks and the paperwork to come through. However, Bitcoin is literally instant. So Bitcoin has what we call a Lightning Network. The Lightning Network does fast transactions, like instant. And then you have the Bitcoin, just the level 1 or level 0 network, right? Where it takes a couple of minutes based on the traffic on the network. Right? So you have a lot of technology that's based around Bitcoin that is great to take advantage of. So that's the technology part of it. So if you're not into the investment, still going for the technology. So I still support economics on Bitcoin, either way.
We mentioned some stuff before. We're talking about there's Bitcoin and then there's altcoins. What's your stance on altcoins? Are there any that you're interested in, or are you just solely in Bitcoin?
So, I mean, everybody has had their what do you call it, foray into different coins. Like I remember in the early 2014-15s, people could mine their Bitcoin on their computers. Like you could take your graphics card on your computer and you could mine Bitcoin. But I came in just as that wasn't possible anymore, and I wanted to mine Bitcoin. I was like, my computer is not powerful enough to mine Bitcoin. So I was like, all right, what's next? And then that month, Dogecoin came out. And I was like, I can mine something. So I went, mine a Dogecoin, and I can't even remember how much I got at the time, right? But my aim was to mine Dogecoin and then convert to Bitcoin. And there was this place that you had to mine and store there was an exchange, Dogecoin exchange, that I had to store my Dogecoin at. And I was mining, and then one day I came and I tried to log in, and the whole exchange was shut down.
When was this? You think?
15, 16 thereabouts. So, what's the exchange called? Can't even remember. And I mean, a lot of these coins, they have their heyday. They go up and it's a lot of excitement, and then there's nowhere to be found. So
remember with Dogecoin, Elon Musk. I wonder if I can share the screen. Like Elon Musk was really big on it. He went on SNL.
Yeah.
And at that time, I think this. Have you seen the chart?
Yeah.
So I think this high. I think this high, the 39 cents or whatever for Dogecoin, I think this was right around like that same night that he was on SNL, and then right after it just tanked.
So when you think about investment, that's why I say you have to come back to the thesis of investment. It's like, what are you investing for? Like, are you investing for the now, or are you investing for the long term? Right? If you're somebody who's like high risk and you want to invest for the now, there are a lot of meme coins coming out. There are a lot of them. Right now it's meme coin season, they call it. Where you jump in a meme coin, you get 300% overnight. And there are people who become millionaires because of these meme coins.
There was a Dogecoin millionaire. I don't know if you know
Yeah.
about him. There was a Dogecoin, and I remember there's a YouTuber I watch, and right when that same Elon Musk stuff was happening, he brought him. He actually went down to the guy's, like he lives in say a different country in the US. He went to the guy's place, saw his house and whatever, and was like talking to him, interviewed him, and was like, "Hey man, like, I think you should just sell some, like just sell some." And he was like, "Nah, man, Dogecoin to the moon, brother." And you know, look where, I mean, at the end of the day, he still is, I think, pretty wealthy, you know, because he bought it from way back. But I mean, things like that is just like,
I bought it that time too. I'd probably be a millionaire. Right? But the point I'm making is with investment, now you think about fundamentals. If you look at every coin except Bitcoin, there is what we call a pre-mine, right? Where the person who made the coin decided, okay, I want 40% of all the coin, and I'll give everybody else. Sometimes that's
a whale.
No, that's way too generous. Actually, a lot of them take like 60 and 70% of all the coins, and then give the rest to the market, which is me and you, right? And so think about all of them: Ethereum, Solana, all those coins. All of them have groups of people behind them. They're individuals, we can call their names, who are behind all these coins. Every single altcoin you can think about, right? And the problem with that is the counterparty risk, as I mentioned earlier. These people, because they own so many of the coins, right? When they see the price of the coin very high, they can rug pull you, right? They just sell a huge amount of their coins, and the market just tanks like in seconds, literally 30% in a second, right? And there's nothing you can do about that because they hold so much of the value of the coin that the moment they do a rug pull, the whole ecosystem falls down, right? And that's just too much of a risk, right? To if you're thinking about long term. But some people like the thrill of saying, okay, because just as fast as it goes down, it can go up. Right? You get a 30% in a day too, right? And a lot of them kind of seeded to do that as well. So how I see it is a really high risk thing, and if you're in it for the thrill, then sure, go ahead. But if you're looking for a long-term thesis for investment, Bitcoin is the only way to do it, right? And there are whales in Bitcoin who have a large amounts of Bitcoin too. I'm not saying they don't have it, but the liquidity in Bitcoin is so huge that they might cause the price to drop 2%, but in a few hours it's back up. Right? It's just such an active network that even the biggest whales can't have outright like manipulation of the market. It take a lot of them to come together to say, hey, let's all like sway the market for a while. And even when they do, it rebounds. The thing I like about Bitcoin is that it never dies, right? If I decide to invest in a stock right now, and the stock goes up, say I buy it at IPO, the price can never pass IPO price, right? IPO can be the highest price the stock will ever get to. We've seen that happen to hundreds of companies at the highest price at IPO, and you have no faith or confidence if this price will ever pass at a certain point. But from my experience in Bitcoin, it will always come back. You'll think it's dead, but it will always revive. And that's just the amazing thing about it, because there's no single counterparty risk that people are looking at to say this is the only reason why Bitcoin should go up. There's just so many other things around the whole ecosystem that impacts the price that no single thing can cause it to permanently go down. Right? And so over time, it will continue to rise. It will fall, and it will go back up again over time. And the cycle just continue. I want you to bring up a graph. You looked at the Bitcoin graph, but I want you to look at the logarithmic Bitcoin graph. That is what we call a more realistic view of the Bitcoin graph as to the price growth. And when you look at it, and they say when you zoom out and look at it, you realize that the volatility that you see is not really as volatile when you look at it from a long-term perspective, it's just always going up. That's how logarithmic graph looks, and that's just kind of scaling it over a longer period of time, and the growth in that sense. So that is pretty much the graph I look at, and you see the growth of Bitcoin when you look at it from that perspective. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I think this was a good conversation. I hope that you I believe that you provide a lot of value to people. Hopefully that you answered a lot of questions. You explained Bitcoin fundamentals. I just want to, thank you for coming onto the show.
Anything you want
else
to
you'd
leave
like
the people with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, stock sats, right? Stock sats. So Bitcoin is broken into 100 million pieces called sats, right? So a term that we as Bitcoiners like to say is just keep stacking sats, keep on adding, keep on investing. Don't stop. I mean, if you can dollar cost average as soon as possible, you put as much into Bitcoin, and I'm always willing to share and talk about Bitcoin. I'm a technology enthusiast. I was telling the guys that I'm into AI as well. So I'm actually thinking of starting an AI YouTube channel soon. So, I'm just all into technology, and Bitcoin is one of the biggest technologies that I've seen. And I think it has the potential to change the world. If not now in the short term, definitely in the long term. But the people who see that vision in the short term are the people who will benefit slightly in the long term. So my idea is to share that vision with you and your audience, and hopefully they will, as excited as people feel about AI, they become excited about Bitcoin as well. So yeah, that's my 2 cents or my 2 sats.
All right, thank you so much, Rohan. Really appreciate you for joining on the podcast, guys. If you like this, just leave a thumbs up, subscribe, right, and hopefully we can give Rohan a shout out whenever he does his YouTube AI channel.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well, if you want to check me out, I'm Frazras on Twitter. So FRA, we can link up.
Frazras. All right,
Okay,
sounds
awesome.
great. All right, thank you, Rohan. This is it. Limitless out.
Peace.